I never thought I'd be abandoned like this. At 68, after raising my son and caring for his family all these years, they put me in a rundown nursing home without a second thought. And the worst part? They didn't even bother to check on me. Not a call, not a visit. Just a goodbye as if I were some unwanted item to discard. They thought I wouldn't fight back, that I was too old to do anything about it. But they were wrong. That's when I decided to take control of my life again. They didn't know who they were dealing with. I was going to change the game. I wasn't going to just sit in that cold room feeling sorry for myself. No. I was going to fight, and when I was done they'd be begging for my forgiveness. Little did they know the next move would be mine. The day they walked into that nursing home, expecting me to stay quiet, that's when they realized I was already one step ahead. I didn't have much money left, but I had enough to make a difference. So I took a deep breath, gathered every last ounce of strength, and made my move. I purchased the nursing home. Yes, I bought the place. It was mine now. And they had no idea what was coming. When I saw their favorite nurse, the one who'd been so kind to them, I knew it was time for the first step of my plan. I called her into my office. She smiled, thinking she was still in control, but I wasn't smiling. I handed her the paperwork. "You're fired," I said, watching her face go pale. It was a moment of pure satisfaction. I had taken back what was mine. And this was just the beginning. They'd soon learn that you don't mess with a woman like me. Especially not when she's been pushed to the edge. The next few days were a blur of decisions and quiet resolve. Martha sat in her small, lonely room, staring out of the window, her mind racing with plans. She had done it. She had bought the nursing home. It was hers now, and nothing would be the same. She had made the move they never saw coming, and already, it felt like a weight was lifting off her shoulders. Every moment she spent in that sterile, cold room made her more determined to turn the tables on her family. The people who thought they could push her aside, use her for their convenience, were in for a rude awakening. Martha wasn't a victim. Not anymore. She could feel the power in her hands now, and it wasn't going to slip away. After the nurse had been fired, there was no time to waste. The place needed a fresh start, a new direction. Something that would show everyone that she was in charge. Martha walked through the halls of the nursing home the next morning. Her steps firm, her posture upright. She greeted the staff with a calm authority that hadn't been there before. They looked at her with a mix of surprise and respect. She had always been a quiet woman, a mother, a wife, content to stay in the background. But now she was different. Martha had become a woman with a purpose, a force to be reckoned with. That morning, she met with the new management team she had hired. There was no time for hesitation. They would understand her vision, her rules. "I want this place to feel like a home, not a warehouse for the elderly," Martha said, her voice steady. "We're going to treat every resident with the respect they deserve, and we'll make sure this facility reflects that. I won't tolerate anything less." The team nodded, some of them clearly taken aback by the strength in her words. But they didn't argue. They had seen the shift in her, the change that had taken place since she took control. Martha wasn't just the owner now, she was the leader. As the days passed, she worked tirelessly, overseeing renovations, reorganizing staff schedules, and ensuring the residents received the care they deserved. No longer was she just a visitor, a forgotten family member in the background. Now she was the one making the decisions, calling the shots, and running the show. One afternoon, as Martha sat at her desk, reviewing the latest changes, she received a call from her son, Richard. It had been a few weeks since they last spoke, and she knew he wasn't calling to check on her. He had no interest in that. "Mom, we need to talk," Richard said, his voice strained. "I heard what you did. Buying the nursing home, firing everyone. What the hell are you thinking?" Martha took a deep breath, her fingers curling around the edge of her desk. She could feel the anger rising, but she wouldn't let it show. "What am I thinking?" she repeated. "I'm thinking I deserve respect. I'm thinking that maybe, just maybe, it's time for you and your wife to realize that I'm not someone you can push around anymore. I'm thinking that it's time for me to live my life on my terms." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mom, this isn't you," Richard said, his voice softer now but still laced with frustration. "You've always been so understanding. You've always let things go." Martha's lips curved into a thin smile. "Maybe I was, Richard. But not anymore. You and your wife, especially your wife, have taken advantage of me long enough. I'm done being your punching bag. You're being unreasonable, he said, his tone rising. You can't just take control of everything. You're out of your mind. Martha's grip tightened around the phone, but she kept her voice calm. I'm not out of my mind, Richard. I'm finally in control. And that's something you can't take away from me. The line went quiet. She could practically hear the frustration building up on the other side. But Martha wasn't going to back down. She had spent too many years quietly accepting her fate. She wasn't going to let them push her around anymore. And from this moment on, everything was going to change. The power had shifted and it wasn't in their hands anymore. It was in hers. It had been a few weeks since Martha had taken control of the nursing home, and already things were changing. The residents seemed to notice the shift. The staff was more attentive, the rooms were brighter, and the food had improved. Martha could feel the weight of the decisions she had made, but there was no going back now. She had spent years being overlooked, being pushed to the margins of her own family, but now she was in charge, and that felt better than she ever imagined. It was the first time in years that she felt truly alive, that she could breathe freely without someone constantly telling her what to do. But there was still one last obstacle to overcome: her son Richard. The phone call she had with him had been tense, to say the least, and Martha knew that he wouldn't just let her take over without a fight. He had always been a mama's boy, and she had always been there to support him, no questions asked. But things had changed. Now it was her turn to make the rules. Richard had already tried to reach her a few more times, but she refused to pick up. She knew what he wanted. He wanted to convince her to sell the nursing home, to back down, to give him and his wife what they wanted. But Martha wasn't going to play along anymore. One afternoon, as she was sitting in her office, going over some paperwork, the phone rang again. This time it was a number she recognized. Richard's name flashed on the screen. She stared at it for a moment before answering. "Mom," Richard said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk. I don't know why you're doing this, but I'm telling you it's not going to work." Martha leaned back in her chair, her hands folded on her desk. "What do you want, Richard?" she asked calmly. "Mom, we're family. This isn't you. You've always been the one who supported me, who understood. Why are you doing this now? You're making a mistake." Martha took a deep breath. She had heard this before, and she wasn't going to let him manipulate her again. "No, Richard. I'm not making a mistake. You and your wife thought you could control me, thought you could push me aside. But you were wrong. I'm not going to sit quietly and let you walk all over me anymore." Richard's tone shifted, becoming defensive. "Mom, this isn't about control. It's about what's best for you. You're not cut out to run a business like this. You don't understand how things work. You're just making things harder for yourself." Martha's lips tightened. "I understand perfectly, Richard. I've been living in your shadow, in your wife's shadow, for too long. I've always done what was best for you, but now I'm doing what's best for me. And I don't need your approval to do it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Martha could almost hear the wheels turning in Richard's head, but she didn't care. She had made up her mind, and no amount of pleading was going to change that. "You're not going to change my mind," she said, her voice steady. "I'm running this place now, and I'm doing it my way. If you don't like it, then that's your problem." Richard's voice came back, quieter now. "Mom, I just want you to be happy. I don't want you to get hurt. Please just think about what you're doing." Martha's eyes narrowed. "I've thought about it long enough, Richard. It's time for me to take control of my life. And nothing you say will change that." There was a finality to her words, and Richard didn't respond. The silence stretched between them, and for the first time in a long while, Martha felt like she had won. She had finally stood up for herself. She had finally taken back what was hers. The nursing home, her independence, her life, it was all hers now. She hung up the phone, and for a moment, she just sat there, letting the reality of what she had done sink in. Felt good. Felt right. She wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. And she wasn't going to let anyone tell her what she could or couldn't do. The battle wasn't over yet. But Martha was ready. She was stronger than she had ever been before. And nothing was going to stop her now. It had been several months since Martha had taken control of the nursing home, and the changes were noticeable. The staff, who had once seemed indifferent, now treated the residents with respect and care. The place no longer felt like a dreary institution. It had begun to feel like a real home. Martha walked through the hallways, her steps steady, her presence commanding. She had transformed the environment, not just physically, but emotionally as well. She had brought a sense of dignity back to the people who had been forgotten, neglected, and left behind by their families. For the first time in years, Martha felt like she was living with purpose. It wasn't just about running a business. It was about restoring the sense of family and respect that had been stripped away from her and others like her. But as things were improving, she knew that her family wasn't just going to let her have this victory without a fight. Richard had stopped calling, but his silence spoke volumes. He was clearly upset, still furious that she had taken such a bold step without consulting him. Martha didn't care. She had made her decision. She had finally taken control of her life, and nothing was going to take that away from her. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that Richard and his wife Sarah were planning something. They hadn't just given up on their plans for the nursing home. They had never been the type to accept defeat. One morning, as Martha was finishing her rounds, one of the nurses pulled her aside. "There's someone here to see you," the nurse said, her voice low. Martha raised an eyebrow. "Who?" The nurse glanced over her shoulder, as if ensuring no one else could hear. "It's Richard." Martha's stomach churned. She hadn't expected to see him so soon, and the thought of him showing up at the nursing home made her uneasy. But she couldn't let him think she was intimidated. "Let him in," Martha said, her voice calm. A few moments later, Richard walked through the door. His face was tight, his jaw clenched. He didn't smile. He didn't even try to hide the anger in his eyes. "Mom," he said, his voice cold. "We need to talk." Martha didn't stand up. She stayed seated, her hands folded on her lap.
"I'm listening."
Richard paced the room for a moment before stopping in front of her. "You think you've won, don't you?" he said, his tone sharp. "You think you've outsmarted me, outsmarted us. But you're wrong. You've made a huge mistake." Martha raised an eyebrow. "A mistake," she repeated. "You mean finally standing up for myself?" Richard's eyes flashed with frustration. "This isn't just about standing up for yourself, Mom. This is about ruining everything I've worked for. Everything Sarah and I have worked for." Martha's lips curled into a slight smile. "You mean everything you've stolen from me?" Richard's expression tightened. "You know it's not like that. I've been trying to do what's best for the family. I'm the one who's been looking out for you all these years." Martha shook her head. "You've never looked out for me, Richard. You've been looking out for yourself. You and Sarah have used me for years and I let it happen. But not anymore. Not now." Richard took a deep breath as if trying to calm himself. "Mom, I'm trying to be reasonable here. I'm offering you a way out. You don't have to keep this place. You can sell it. We can fix this. I'll buy it from you and you'll be taken care of. You'll never have to worry about anything again." Martha studied him for a moment, her gaze steady. "Why don't you just say what you really mean, Richard?" she asked. "You want me to sell the nursing home so you can take control of it. You want to get your hands on everything I've built. But it's not going to happen." Richard's face reddened. "You don't understand, Mom. This is about the family. You're making it all about you." Martha stood up now, her posture straight and firm. "No, Richard. This is about me. For once it's about me. And I won't let you take it away from me. I've worked too hard for this, and I won't let you or Sarah ruin it." Richard's expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "You're making a big mistake," he said. "You're pushing everyone away." Martha met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "No, Richard. I'm finally taking control of my life. And if that means pushing you away, then so be it." Richard's jaw clenched, and for a moment it seemed like he might say something more. But instead, he turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. Martha didn't follow. She didn't need to. She had made her choice and there was no going back. As she watched him leave, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. The storm had passed. And Martha had won. It had been a week since Richard's visit, and Martha's mind was still focused on what he had said. The encounter left her shaken, but not in the way he had hoped. She wasn't afraid of losing control. In fact, she felt more powerful than ever before. The nursing home was thriving under her care. The staff was responsive, the residents were happier, and the place finally felt like it was meant to. But Richard's words lingered, echoing in her mind. Asterisk, you're making a mistake. Asterisk, he didn't understand. He never had. Martha had spent her life taking care of everyone else, always putting others first, always being the good mother, the good wife. She had let her needs, her desires fade into the background. But not anymore. This was her time. She had worked too hard to let him or anyone else tell her what to do. The next morning, Martha sat in her office, reviewing some of the reports the staff had given her. The facility was doing well, but she knew there was always room for improvement. She had never been one to rest on her laurels. As she made her notes, a knock on the door pulled her out of her thoughts. "Come in," she called, not looking up from her papers. The door opened and one of the nurses, Janet, stepped inside. "Martha, there's someone here to see you," she said, hesitating as she noticed the concentration on Martha's face. "Who is it?" Martha asked, glancing up now. Janet looked uneasy. "It's Sarah, Richard's wife." Martha's heart sank. She hadn't expected to see Sarah here. She had hoped that after Richard's visit, his wife would stay out of her business. But apparently that wasn't going to happen. Martha took a deep breath, setting her pen down. "Send her in," she said, her voice steady. Sarah entered a moment later, a tight smile on her lips. She looked around the office, taking in the changes that Martha had made to the place. "I see you're doing well," Sarah said, her tone sweet but laced with something sharp. "I didn't expect this place to be so nice." Martha stood up, walking over to the window, her back to Sarah. "What brings you here, Sarah?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Sarah stepped closer, her heels clicking against the floor. "Richard and I have been talking," she said, her voice suddenly turning serious. "And we've come to a decision. You need to sell this place. It's clear that you're in over your head. You're not cut out for this kind of responsibility." Martha turned to face her, her expression unreadable. "I'm perfectly capable of running this place, Sarah. I've done it for months now, and it's doing better than it ever has." Sarah's smile faltered, and for a brief moment, Martha could see the mask slip. "Martha, you don't understand," Sarah said, stepping closer. "You don't have the resources to keep this going. You don't have the staff, the money, or the connections to make this successful. You're playing a dangerous game, and I don't want to see you get hurt." Martha held her gaze, refusing to back down. "You think I don't know what I'm doing?" she asked, her voice low. "You think I'm just some old woman who doesn't know how to take care of herself? I'm not a fool, Sarah. I know exactly what I'm doing." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "I'm just trying to help, Martha. I'm trying to make sure you don't make a huge mistake. This isn't about control. It's about what's best for everyone." Martha's lips curled into a slight smile. "What's best for everyone?" she repeated. "You don't get it, do you, Sarah? This isn't about what's best for anyone but me. I'm done putting everyone else's needs ahead of mine. I'm done letting you and Richard walk all over me." Sarah looked at her for a moment, her face hardening. "You'll regret this, you know," she said, her voice colder now. "You're going to lose everything. Richard and I won't stand by and watch you ruin your life." Martha's heart pounded, but she didn't let it show. She had already made her decision. "You don't have to worry about me, Sarah," she said, her tone final. "I'm doing just fine. And I'm not going anywhere." Sarah hesitated, her face still tight with anger. Then, without another word, she turned and left the office. Martha stood there for a moment, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk. She could feel the weight of the conversation, but she refused to let it get to her. She had worked too hard to let anyone take this from her. As the door clicked shut, Martha let out a slow breath. She knew that Sarah and Richard weren't going to give up easily. But Martha wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. She had taken control of her life, and she wasn't about to let anyone take that away from her. The days that followed Sarah's visit felt heavier than Martha had anticipated. She knew the tension between her and her family wasn't over, but she was determined to stay firm. The nursing home was thriving under her leadership, and it was hers. No one could take that away from her now. She had made the right decision. Still, Richard's silence haunted her. She couldn't help but wonder what he and Sarah were planning next. Martha wasn't someone who waited for things to happen. She made things happen. One morning, as she was walking through the halls, a nurse stopped her with a concerned expression. "Martha, there's someone here to see you." They didn't give a name, but they said it's urgent. Martha felt a flicker of unease. She had learned by now that no one came to see her with good news. She nodded to the nurse. "Show them in." A moment later, the door opened, and to Martha's surprise, it wasn't Richard or Sarah standing there. It was someone she hadn't expected to see at all: Martin, her late husband's lawyer. He stepped inside, his face as serious as ever. "Martha," he said quietly, closing the door behind him. "I need to talk to you. It's about your husband's estate." Martha's heart skipped a beat. She had not expected to hear from Martin again. After her husband passed, she had assumed all matters concerning his estate had been settled. But Martin's presence here now meant something had changed. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice steady despite the sudden rush of thoughts in her mind. Martin hesitated for a moment, as though weighing his words carefully. "I'm afraid there's something important you need to know," he began, his tone unusually soft. "Before your husband passed, he made some last-minute changes to his will, and I'm afraid the contents might surprise you." Martha's brow furrowed. "Changes? What kind of changes?" "I can't go into the full details just yet, but I think you should know that your husband left a provision that might affect your future with the family," Martin continued. "It's a clause that deals with behavior, specifically how your family treats you after his passing." Martha felt her pulse quicken. Her mind raced with possibilities. "What kind of behavior?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Martin looked down at the envelope in his hand and then back up at her. "Your husband left instructions that if any family member were to treat you poorly, to publicly humiliate you, or to try to take advantage of you in any way, they would forfeit their inheritance. The money, the house, everything he left behind. It would go to you instead." Martha's eyes widened in disbelief. She had always known her husband cared for her, but hearing these words, knowing he had taken such drastic measures, left her speechless. "I don't understand," she finally managed to say. "Why didn't you tell me about this sooner?" Martin sighed. "He asked me not to mention it unless it became necessary. He didn't want anyone to know until they showed their true colors." Martha was silent for a long moment, absorbing the weight of what Martin had just revealed. So it wasn't just the nursing home that Richard and Sarah had been planning to take away from her. They had been trying to strip her of everything her husband had left her. Everything she had worked for. And her husband had seen it coming. She wasn't just a victim in this game. She was being protected by forces beyond her control. Martha slowly rose from her chair, a wave of realization washing over her. She wasn't powerless, not anymore. Her husband had thought ahead. He had given her the one thing she needed most: control. "What do I do now?" she asked, more to herself than to Martin. "You have a choice," Martin replied, his voice gentle. "You can use this clause to ensure your family knows that you will not stand for any more manipulation. You have the power to stop them in their tracks. And if you choose to, you could take legal action to claim what's rightfully yours." Martha's lips tightened into a smile, a feeling of vindication rising inside her. For years, she had let Richard and Sarah run her life. But now the tables had turned. They would not get away with it anymore. "I know what I have to do," Martha said, her voice calm, her resolve unwavering. She would not let them take away her future. She would fight for her place in this world. As Martin left the office, Martha sat back down at her desk, her hands resting on the papers in front of her. She knew the battle wasn't over. But for the first time in years, she felt like she was in control. No one would push her aside again. Not now, not ever. Weeks passed and Martha's life seemed to be moving forward with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The nursing home was flourishing under her leadership, the staff respected her, and the residents were finally receiving the care they deserved. But despite all the improvements and success, Martha knew that her family was still out there, plotting, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Richard had kept his distance since their last conversation, but Martha could feel his presence looming over everything. He was still her son and he still thought he could control her. She wouldn't let him, not anymore. One afternoon, as Martha was sitting at her desk, reviewing the latest financial report, she was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. "Come in," she called, not looking up. The door creaked open, and the familiar face of Janet, one of the nurses, appeared. "Martha, there's someone here to see you," Janet said. "It's Richard. He insists on speaking with you." Martha's stomach dropped. She had hoped that this moment wouldn't come, that Richard would eventually accept her independence. But here he was knocking on her door once again. She knew that whatever he wanted, it wasn't good. "Send him in," Martha said, her voice steady despite the wave of unease that washed over her. The door opened fully, and Richard stepped inside. His face was as rigid as ever, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowed in a way that made Martha's heart race. He looked angry, desperate even, as if he had come to reclaim what he thought was rightfully his. "Mom," Richard said, his voice clipped, "we need to talk." Martha didn't stand up, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her nervous. She remained seated, her posture straight, her hands clasped in front of her. "I'm listening," she said, her voice calm and measured. Richard closed the door behind him, taking a few steps forward before stopping. "I've been thinking," he began, his words deliberate, "and I realized something. You're not going to be able to keep this up forever. You don't have the resources. You don't have the support." Martha raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. She let him continue, knowing that whatever he was about to say was just another attempt to manipulate her into giving up. "I know you think you've got everything under control," Richard went on, "but you're only hurting yourself. The home, the staff, none of it is sustainable without help. You can't do this alone." Martha's gaze remained steady, unflinching. "I've been doing it alone for a long time, Richard," she said quietly. "And I'm doing just fine." Richard's expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "You don't have to do this alone," he insisted. "Sarah and I want to help you. We're willing to work with you. If you just sell the home and let us handle things, everything will go back to normal. We'll make sure you're taken care of." Martha's lips curled into a thin smile. "Back to normal?" she repeated. "You mean back to the way things were before? When you and Sarah thought you could control my life?" Richard stepped forward, his voice rising. "This isn't about control, Mom. This is about what's best for you. You don't know what you're doing. This is too much for you to handle." Martha's eyes narrowed. "What's best for me, Richard, is exactly what I'm doing right now. I'm not going to sell. I'm not going to give up everything I've worked for just to make you and Sarah comfortable. I've been overlooked for too long, but not anymore." Richard looked at her, disbelief in his eyes. "You're making a huge mistake," he said, his voice strained. "You'll regret this. You don't have the strength to keep fighting. You'll burn out." Martha stood up slowly, her movements deliberate. "I've been fighting my entire life, Richard," she said softly. "And I'm not about to stop now." She walked past him, her hand brushing against his arm as she made her way to the window. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. For a moment Martha just stood there looking out. Then she turned back to face her son. "I've had enough, Richard," she said. "I'm not your pawn anymore. And I'm not going to let you or anyone else dictate how I live my life." Richard stood frozen, his face a mask of frustration and anger. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," he said quietly. Martha didn't flinch. She wasn't going to let his words break her. She had spent far too long letting others control her. Not anymore. "Goodbye, Richard," she said, her voice final. She walked back to her desk, sitting down once more. She didn't need to explain herself any further. The decision had been made. Richard stood there for a moment longer, his anger simmering beneath the surface. But finally, without another word, he turned and walked out, leaving Martha alone in her office. As the door closed behind him, Martha took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle into her bones. The battle wasn't over, but it felt like the beginning of something new, something she could finally call her own. Months passed, and Martha's life at the nursing home had settled into a rhythm. The changes she had made were evident, both in the physical environment and in the way people treated one another. The residents had begun to feel like family again, and the staff who had once been indifferent now worked with purpose and respect. Martha had earned their trust. She had earned their respect. But even with all the progress, there was one lingering thought that never left her mind: her family. Richard hadn't come around since their last heated conversation, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease whenever she thought about him. He had always been the one to call the shots, to push her into the background, but now he was gone and she was in control. Or so she thought. One afternoon, as Martha was sitting in her office, organizing some new paperwork for the facility, her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. "Come in," she said, not looking up. The door creaked open and Janet, one of the nurses, entered. "Martha," she said, hesitating before continuing, "there's someone here to see you." Martha looked up, expecting to see one of the staff or maybe a family member of a resident. But instead it was someone she didn't expect at all. Sarah, Richard's wife. The one person Martha had hoped would stay out of her business. Sarah stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, a cold expression on her face. "Martha," Sarah said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "we need to talk." Martha stood up slowly, not feeling the need to put on a show. She had nothing to hide anymore. She had fought for this life, and she wasn't about to let Sarah intimidate her. "What do you want?" Martha asked, her voice steady and calm. Sarah stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "I think you know why I'm here," she said, her tone becoming more serious. "You've made a mess of everything. Richard and I have been trying to be patient with you, but this is getting out of hand." Martha crossed her arms, leaning against her desk. "What exactly is getting out of hand, Sarah?" "The fact that I've finally taken control of my own life. That I'm not letting you and Richard walk all over me anymore." Sarah's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Martha could see the anger behind the mask of politeness. "You don't understand, do you?" Sarah said, her voice low. "This isn't about you. This is about the family. Richard and I have always done what's best for the family, and now you're making things difficult. You're ruining everything." Martha's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a smile of warmth. "I'm ruining everything," she repeated. "You and Richard have been ruining everything for years, Sarah. You've used me, manipulated me, and I've let it happen. But not anymore. I've made my decision, and I'm not going to let you change that." Sarah's face flushed with frustration. "You're being selfish," she said, her voice rising. "You're putting your own wants ahead of everyone else. You don't have the strength to keep running this place. You're going to fail, and when you do, don't come running to us for help." Martha stood tall now, her eyes locked onto Sarah's. "You think I need your help, Sarah? You think I need anyone's help? You've got it all wrong. I'm not going to fail. I'm stronger than I've ever been, and I'm not about to let you or Richard take this away from me." Sarah stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You'll regret this, Martha. You'll see. You're making a big mistake." Martha's gaze never wavered. "I'm not making a mistake. I'm finally living my life the way I've always wanted to. I'm in control now. And no one, not even you, is going to change that." The room was thick with tension, but Martha didn't break. She wasn't afraid anymore. Sarah took one last look at her, her face twisted with anger, before she turned and walked out of the office. Martha didn't move. She didn't feel the need to say anything more. She had made her point. She had taken her life back. For the first time in years, Martha felt a sense of calm wash over her. The storm with her family wasn't over, but she knew she was ready for whatever came next. She had already won, and no one was going to take that away from her. Martha sat in her office, the room filled with the soft hum of the fluorescent lights above. It had been a few days since Sarah's visit, and the weight of their conversation still lingered in her mind. Sarah had tried to intimidate her, but Martha wasn't afraid anymore. She had learned long ago that fear was a prison, and she had finally broken free. The nursing home was hers, and with each passing day, it became more and more clear that the decision she had made was the right one. But despite the sense of accomplishment, a small part of Martha couldn't help but wonder what Richard and Sarah were planning next. They wouldn't just let her take control without some kind of retaliation. Martha's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a knock on the door. "Come in," she called, not looking up from the paperwork in front of her. The door opened slowly and Janet, one of the nurses, stepped inside. "Martha," Janet said, her voice quiet. "There's someone here to see you." Martha's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. And the last person she wanted to see right now was Richard. "Who is it?" Martha asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Janet hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "It's Richard." Martha's stomach dropped. She knew this moment was inevitable, but she had hoped it wouldn't come so soon. Richard had stayed away for weeks, giving her space to settle into her new role, but now he was back. She had no idea what he wanted, but she was done letting him control the situation. She stood up from her desk, her movements slow but deliberate. "Send him in," she said, her voice calm but firm. The door opened wider, and Richard stepped inside. He looked the same, disheveled, tense, and angry. Martha couldn't help but notice the way his shoulders were hunched, as though he was preparing for a confrontation. "Mom," he said, his voice strained. "We need to talk." Martha didn't offer him a seat. Instead, she leaned against her desk, arms crossed, waiting for him to continue. "What's this about, Richard?" she asked, her tone measured. "What do you want?" Richard sighed, his frustration evident. "You know why I'm here. You've made a mess of everything. The family's falling apart because of your actions." Martha raised an eyebrow. "My actions," she repeated. "It's not about me, Richard. It's about you and Sarah. You've been trying to control me for years, but that ends now. This nursing home is mine. It's my choice, and I'm not giving it up." Richard's face reddened with anger. "You don't understand, do you?" he snapped. "This isn't just about the nursing home. It's about everything. You've ruined our plans, Mom. We've been trying to work with you, but you won't listen." Martha's lips curled into a small smile. "You've never wanted to work with me, Richard. You and Sarah have been using me for years. You've taken everything I've had, and I let you. But not anymore. I'm done being your pawn." Richard's hands clenched into fists, his frustration mounting. "You're being unreasonable," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "You can't keep this up. You're going to lose everything. You're already in over your head." Martha stepped closer, her posture strong, unwavering. "I've been living in your shadow for too long, Richard," she said quietly. "You and Sarah have treated me like I was invisible, like I didn't matter. But I do matter. And I'm not going to let you take what's mine." Richard's eyes widened, a flicker of realization crossing his face. "You don't mean that," he said, his voice softening. "You don't have to do this. Just give it up and we can go back to normal." Martha shook her head, her expression firm. "There's no going back, Richard. I've made my choice. I'm not selling. I'm not backing down. And I'm not going to let you take this away from me." Richard took a step back, his frustration turning to disbelief. "You're making a huge mistake," he muttered almost to himself. "You're going to regret this." Martha stood her ground, her eyes locked on his. "I don't regret a thing," she said, her voice steady. "I'm finally taking control of my life. And that's something you can't take away from me." Richard stood there for a moment, his face a mask of anger and defeat. Finally, without saying another word, he turned and walked out of the room. Martha didn't move. She didn't need to. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment she finally took her life back. And it felt better than she could have imagined. As the door closed behind him, Martha took a deep breath. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time in years she felt at peace. She had won.